Hello everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Silk Road Revival. Our today's guest is Maximilian Kasy. He's from Oxford University. Hello, Professor. Happy to see you in Silk Road Revival.
Nice to meet you.
Uh-huh. And before jumping into the questions, I want to briefly introduce you to our audience. Professor Maximilian Kasy is an economic professor, as I mentioned, at the University of Oxford. He coordinates the machine learning and economics group at Oxford. His research focuses on machine learning theory, the social impact of algorithmic decision making, the political economy of AI, economic inequality, publication bias, adaptive experimental design, and statistical decision making, and identification and casualty. So, in part one, like I wanna just to know, get to know each other. So I wanna know more about you. I saw your profile, like about your achievements. So my first question is what made you choose economics and specifically machine learning theory and the political economy of AI?
So it's been, I guess, a somewhat circuitous road, but I have a background originally both in economics and in mathematics and statistics. And so for a long time, my focus was more on econometrics, causal inference, those kinds of topics. And I was separately interested in questions of labor economics, economic inequality, and development economics too. And so over the last 10, 15 years, I've kind of moved from like econometrics and statistics towards machine learning. And that's what I've been teaching for the last 10 years for the most part. And so what I've been trying to do in my research, and I guess also in the book we're going to talk about in a minute, is to try and really bridge the gaps that are out there, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's on the technical side of machine learning and AI and so on, but with less awareness of the social context, I would say. And then there's a lot of stuff that's a bit more on the critical and big picture side, but maybe with less insight into the technical aspects. And so what I'm really trying to do in my work and in this book and more broadly is to bring those two sides together to approach like thinking about these technologies in a way where we come from like a technical understanding of what they're actually doing, but also thinking about the broader social context.
Got it. And what real world problem first motivated your interest in economics, inequality, and basic income programs?
I mean, I guess that's what originally brought me into economics is thinking about questions like economic inequality, social mobility, so mobility across generations, like how the status of children relates to the status of the parents, questions like that, and thinking about how policy contributes to all that. So that's kind of what I found attractive about economics as a field, is that we think more systematically about how we can really change these things, hopefully for the better. Yeah, and kind of one aspect of that is social policy, right, which includes things like basic income programs, job guarantee programs, and so on that I've been studying in my more applied work. Of course, also many other possible policies on which we don't have as much evidence yet, and I think we're doing solid empirical research on these topics can really help the policy debate and make things less dogmatic, because people often come with preset ideas to these things, and reality is often a bit more complicated or nuanced. So I think empirical work can help us appreciate that.
And like when I think about AI, like there are like both advantages and disadvantages of it. For example, it kind of makes our life easier, help us work faster, and driving progress, and helps us to drive progress and etc. And generally, I think it's that's a good thing, I guess. But in terms of like workplace, like it's kind of taking over the I mean replacing the employees, like I mean the workers in the workplace. So well, yeah, but it's kind of beneficial for the overall I mean for the employer, right? Like I mean that as a director, he is kind of benefiting, but not the workers. So my question, will AI be used to help everyone equally, Or will it just become a tool that makes billionaires richer while making life harder or more insecure for the average worker?
So my overall answer to this question would be that it's not decided yet. It's
Mhm,
AI is a technology that's a tool, and tools can be used for many different things. And that's especially true for such a general purpose technology as AI that can be used for so many different things. And so what I really want to argue for is not so much that AI is great and going to help everyone, or AI is bad and is going to hurt everyone, or is going to make things more unequal, but instead that it depends on who makes the decisions and what it is used for. Right,
mhm,
so one analogy I like to make is if we go back in history when iron making was invented, right? You can use iron to make swords and weapons. You can use it to build plows that make agriculture more productive and combat famine, right? And it's not inherent to what iron is that it's used for one or the other thing. We can use it for all kinds of things, and so it really depends on what we do with it as a society. And I think very
mhm,
much the same is true for artificial intelligence as well, which really, if you look under the hood, is a technology that's ultimately about optimization,
mhm,
right? So it's about taking some numerical measure of success and making that as large as possible. That's what all of AI algorithms are about. And so what we optimize, that's really up for grabs, right? We can optimize all
mhm,
kinds of things. And so it depends on who makes the decisions, what is being optimized, and in whose interest the technology ends up being used.
mhm. All right. Okay, got it. And my next question, at the machine learning and economic group, did you ever see cases where relying on algorithmic decision making actually end up causing harm?
There are many cases of that. Again, going back to what I was just trying to say, right, where AI can be used for many different purposes. And so if we look at what automated decision making is being used in practice, then there are all kinds of questionable applications from the private sector to
Mhm,
government use cases. Right, so just to give you a few examples, like algorithms are used to manage gig workers, decide who gets what wage and when they get to work. If you apply for a job at a major company these days, they are going to use AI to screen applicants. If you go online, it's algorithms that decide what you learn about the world, right? All these social media feed algorithms and search engines and everything. They decide what information you get to see with all the political consequences that has. But it's also like government use cases, right? So, for instance, in the United States, there is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement,
mhm,
which has been tasked to deport 1 million people from the country. They use an algorithm called Immigration OS, built by Palantir, which is combining all government data sources with the explicit objective of putting 1 million people in camps.
mhm,
If you're on the receiving end of that, you're probably not going to be so happy. Or if you look at recent wars, like in the bombardment of Gaza, for instance, there was an algorithm called Lavender that was used to decide who was supposed to be killed, and another algorithm called Very Steady that was used to decide or to predict when people are at home to decide when to drop the bombs.
mhm,
Right. So again, if you're at the receiving end, you're probably not going to be so happy about that. So it's many different use cases that these technologies can be used for, and who decides matters for what it is going to be used for, and who benefits and who loses. And many cases that I would think are fairly horrific.
mhm. Got it. And about the books, like I mean your books, like the means of prediction, and this there's this other works, like how different is doing pure economics research versus writing public facing books like the means of prediction to spark democratic debates, like the difference, like.
I mean, it is different, right? So like the main job of an academic typically is to write papers for other academics,
Mhm,
right? And that's technical. That's often for a fairly small audience. Um, it's hard. It's also focused usually on what is your additional contribution relative to what
mhm,
others have done. Whereas if you write a book like I did with the means of prediction, then you're writing for a much larger set of people and for the broader debate,
mhm,
which has a lot of features that I find very attractive. Like you can draw on a lot of different debates, right? Like in that book, I was drawing on computer science, on philosophy, on law,
Mhm.
politics in addition to economics. And you can draw on the ideas and insights of other people as opposed to focusing just on what's your own additional insight relative to what's already been done.
Mhm.
And I think ultimately I think what matters most, if as I do, if we believe that our goal should be to have like broad democratic debate and democratic control where people get to decide on their own fate, then we need to have a democratic public debate and not just a debate within small elites or within small sets of academic communities. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. And I think that's something we should do more often as academics.
Mhm. Got it. And moving to the next part, like for this one, I chose your research paper called "The Political Economy of AI Towards Democratic Control of the Means of Prediction." So I have a couple of questions for that. I mean, and if someone wants to, check your this research paper, we will leave the link below under the like pod video on the YouTube. So my first question is about the trap of automated fairness. So tech companies usually say an AI is fair if its predictions are equally accurate for everyone. But your paper argues that this definition just helps companies maximize their profit while ignoring deep wealth gaps. Why do you think the uh, tech world is so focused on this narrow idea of fairness, and how do we change the conversation to focus on what actually helps everyone? I mean, helps everyday people.
Yeah. So that's something that unfortunately economists have also contributed to, I think.
Mhm.
And so economists have been thinking for a long time about discrimination or bias and so on, whether
Mhm.
it's by humans or by algorithms.
Mhm.
And so the way economists often define it is using this notion of it's called taste-based discrimination, which
Mhm.
was introduced by an economist called Gary Becker. And so the idea there is that let's take the example of hiring, right? A company might hire for some positions,
Uh-huh.
might hire men or women, for instance. Um, and the way Gary Becker defined discrimination is to say that the firm is discriminating if it's hiring more men, even though hiring more women would lead to higher profits.
Mhm.
Right. So that was his definition of discrimination, and that's I would argue a very limited definition of discrimination because that tells us nothing, for instance, about inequality between men or women or
Uh-huh.
between any other groups you might care about. It's really just asking, can we increase the profits of the firm? And so
Mhm.
exactly those same definitions are now being used by computer scientists and they're being used by companies when they talk about bias or discrimination. But really, that's a very limited notion because it's really just asking again, have you maximized the interests of whoever is already in power, whoever is already controlling the algorithms of the firm, right? Which is in particular profit maximization, which is a very different question from asking what's happening to inequality in various forms, who benefits, who loses. And so, of course, that's a question that's of interest to companies, right? They want to maximize profits,
Mhm.
but it's not the question we should necessarily care about as a broader society when we ask about what's the impact of algorithms and in particular the impact on different groups. And so I think there's a lot of confusion, including among well-meaning people, that they do one thing and think that they're doing the other thing, right? Where
Mhm.
they think they care about inequality between groups, but what they actually just ask these bias questions that are much more limited.
Mhm. Uh, all right, I got it. And the next question, like, is like about the illusion of personal privacy. Like, there
Mhm.
is like in for example, in a particular app, there is like some kind of button there. So it kind of says that if you click on this button, we kind of keep your all information on ourselves. So like we know that the single opt-out button on our phones is an illusion that doesn't actually protect us because of how AI connects the dots between people. Since that individual approach is broken, what is the alternative? And how do communities, workers, or regular citizens actually band together to take real democratic control over how data is collected and used?
Yeah. So, uh, right. So one of to take a step back, one of the key ingredients for building machine learning algorithms and these automated decision-making systems is of course the training data, right? The data that are being used to learn the patterns that these algorithms then use for decisions. And so many of these data are about people, right? So they might be just collecting data on, say, school students from Uzbekistan who are interested in economics or something like that. And now the way the approach that a lot of regulation has taken to privacy is very much about individuals, right? So for instance, in the European Union, there's what's called the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is like a piece of legislation that a lot of other countries have also modified or adapted themselves. But that's all about individual rights. It's about your right to keep your data private and decide who you want to share your data. But the problem with that is that machine learning is never about your individual data. It's about patterns across people, right? So if you don't share your data, but they collect the data from other school students from Uzbekistan who care about economics, then they can use those data and make predictions about you and the other way around. And that's what economists call an externality, right? If, for instance, the decisions of other people to share their data impacts you and the other way around, that's an externality. Similar to pollution, right? When you produce carbon dioxide, then that's affecting the climate for everybody, not just for you. And so when we have externalities, then what's happening is that any individual property rights or control rights are not really going to solve anything, because everybody's decisions affect everybody else. And so there's various ways you could go about that. One solution that's just to solve that, one solution that economists often talk about is something like PIGU taxes, where you can, for instance, let people pay taxes for data sharing in this case. But that's very complicated to get right. And I think the much more promising approach is to say, like, all the people in some application domain, say on some social media website or in some healthcare provider or things like that, who are being impacted, they have to collectively decide what data is collected and to what end it is used. Right? So health data, for instance, that are used to predict diseases, right? They can be used for good purposes, like predicting early on, like who's going to get sick and give them early treatment. Or the same data could be used to just exclude people from health insurance who are likely to be sick, right? And then kind of undoing the purpose of health insurance. And so rather than just deciding to collect data or not, we need to collectively decide what data we want to collect and what purposes we want to use for. And so for that, again, we need to build democratic institutions rather than just focusing on individual property rights.
Got it. And your paper mentions that when we give an AI specific number to maximize, like for example advertisement clicks or match rates, it completely ignores human values that can't be measured, like mental health or job security. Are there certain important parts of society where we should just ban optimizing AI altogether because human values can't be reduced to a number?
I think yes. So there's a debate that's been big in AI, which is called value alignment. Right? So value alignment is this idea that what the computer maximizes is a little bit different from what you care about. And if the computer is really good at maximizing that, then the things can get really bad. And so that's behind what a lot of the discussions around AI safety. And so what you just mentioned is exactly kind of this argument, which I think is sometimes true. Sometimes we just can't measure the things we care about, right? For a whole number of reasons, not just because you can't put them in numbers, but because it's hard to get the relevant data, right? And so then we shouldn't just go about maximizing only the things we can measure. That can go poorly. And so I think that's a real issue, and we need to think about that. Even though I think the even bigger issue is again, who decides what to maximize, right? So you mentioned ad clicks, right? So if people have discussed a lot that social media algorithms create things like filter bubbles or hate speech online, or maybe mental health issues, especially for younger users. And so those are real problems, and the value alignment logic would be, oh, we just need to figure out what the owners of the algorithm really want, right? But if we think about what these problems are about, it's not just that we need to figure out what Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Facebook, really wants. But he cares about making money from ads, and so he wants to maximize ad clicks. But it's, again, that what he wants is not necessarily what the rest of us want. Right? We might want a functioning public sphere or democratic debate, or not have hate speech or discrimination online or all those issues, right? And there's an issue in how can we measure these things, but there's an even more first order issue, which is, are those things that we care about as a society, even though Mark Zuckerberg doesn't necessarily care about them?
Yeah.
Right? And so those are two related but separate issues.
Got it. And my last question for this research paper is like about like this killing of the world class. So mainstream economists often blame technological unemployment on skill-based technical change, implying workers just need to code or get higher degrees. However, your paper suggests that the direction of AI is a deliberate choice by those in power, often leaning toward automation to bypass worker leverage. How can regular worker and labor unions gain the strategic power to demand AI that complements their skills rather than replacing their livelihoods?
Yeah. So yes, this whole literature on skill bias technical change, right, is something that came mostly from looking at the labor market in the US in the 80s and 90s. In the meantime, people have noted all kinds of more complicated patterns there. But either way, I think the debate has shifted, and rightly so, towards saying again that these things depend on choices, right? This is not just something that happens to us. It's all kinds of people making all kinds of choices about how to use technology and to what ends. Like for instance, Darren Acemoglu, an economist at MIT, has made the same argument. And so, yeah, that then raises the question: how could we get to a point where the technology is used in different ways? And I mean that then corresponds to bigger questions about how power is distributed in society and who holds power. And there's a lot of things that influence that, right? And there's no one simple answer to how to shift power in that way. But there are a lot of levers that the state has, so policy impacts that shift control, like who has actual control over data, who has what privacy rights, how do you deal with competition in the market or allow power concentration, how do you deal with labor rights, right? And for instance, parts of Northern Europe have much stronger rules around co-determination, that workers or worker representatives are involved in firm decision making, and that really impacts, I think, like the way modern technologies have been used, say in countries like Sweden or Denmark, is different from other countries, precisely because the workers are also involved in decision making, how they use them in the workplace. And as a consequence, you have seen much less of this de-skilling or replacement of workers there. Yeah, so that's not like a complete answer to your question, but I think what it points to is that there is a lot of scope of moving things in various directions.
Thank you, Professor. And moving to the part three, like you chose. I mean, you gave me choice, and I actually choose the research paper for part three too. Like, and it's called "Employing the Unemployed of Marienthal Evaluation of a Guaranteed Job Program." So, for my first question about your this research paper, I mean, related to the methodology and design.
Mhm.
So, so you I mean, you and with your colleagues leverage three distinct evaluation strategies in your research paper, like pairwise matched randomization, pre-registered synthetic control, and a demographic comparison with neighboring control towns. So my question is like, how does combining these methods help the researchers? I mean, you prove that part of the success belongs just to the individuals who got the jobs versus how the entire local economy shifted because the program existed.
Yeah, so this is a paper that's a policy evaluation, right? So that's some of my more applied work, which is a kind of field experiment. So the issue when we evaluate policies is always to know, well, like, what would have happened if we don't implement the policy. Right? That's what's called the issue of causal inference. So you need to find good comparison groups, and typically people argue that the best thing to do is a randomized experiment
Mm-hmm.
where you just randomly pick who gets the policy, who doesn't, and then you compare them. And that way you get a good sense about like what would have happened with or without the policy. And so that's part of what we are doing here too. But there are some complications that come from the fact that we, from what the policymaker wanted, like everybody in that town had to be treated, but at the same time it's a somewhat small town, so the sample is not huge. So for statistical precision, you have to be careful. And so what we did is use these different strategies that you mentioned, with the idea of getting as much precision as we can, but also to learn about not only the effect at the level of the individual, but also at the level of the community, right? Because often we think that policies don't just impact the people who receive the policies themselves, but have larger impacts on the local economy. And for that, you can't just compare individuals, you need to compare things at the town level, for instance, or ideally even at larger levels, which we couldn't do here. Right? So that's what this so-called synthetic control comparison is doing here, is picking towns beforehand that are similar to the town where the policy was implemented, and then following them over time to see how they develop differently, in addition to the randomized experiment where we compare different individuals.
Got it. And my next question is about like labor market spillovers and theory. So traditional economics say a guaranteed job program makes people lazy and hurts the local job market. How did this study use its data clone like synthetic control and job finding speeds like hazard rates to prove that theory completely wrong?
Yeah, so right. So what? Let me maybe describe the policy a little bit before answering your question. So what this was a job guarantee program where all the long-term unemployed people in the town got a guaranteed job from the government, which was kind of tailored to their circumstances. And so, yeah, one worry that sometimes comes is exactly as you say, that this might displace existing jobs in the economy, right? Just doing it maybe less efficiently in a government program rather than what happened anyway, and so thereby not really creating new jobs. And another worry would be that maybe people are just waiting for a guaranteed job, which they know they will get later. And so we look at both of these in detail, right? So the first question is actually one of the spillover questions that we just mentioned, right? That's what the synthetic control comparison was about, where we really see that there was no reduction at all for job creation for people who were not eligible for the program. So if anything, there were more other jobs too. Right, so that's at the level of the whole town. Like people who couldn't get the guaranteed job, none of them lost the job as a consequence. If anything, more of them found a job. And the other thing that you can look at is like the profile over time of when people find jobs. Right, so what kind of standard models in economics might predict is that as you get closer and closer to the cutoff where you could get the job, which in this case was after 9 months of unemployment, you might be more and more inclined to wait. Like if you know it's only 2 weeks left until you get a guaranteed job, you don't need to search as hard for another job. So you would expect this decline in job finding rates over time. But that's again not at all what we see over time. If anything, the job finding rate increases for the people, even though they've have a chance to get the guaranteed job afterwards. So these standard predictions don't really work out here, and doesn't look like there's any displacement for standard for market jobs. And also interestingly, a related point is, so this was a guaranteed job, but it was completely voluntary, right? So people could just stay on regular unemployment insurance, and nonetheless, 100% of the people who were offered one of these jobs actually took it, right? So everybody really wanted to work as soon as they got offered a job. So, which tells us, I think, a lot about what unemployment is and isn't about. It's not about these people not wanting to work. As soon as they had an offer, they took it.
Got it. And my next question is about like welfare and economic indicators. So the traditional job markers like ALMP just care about getting people off government benefits. However, this specific Austrian job guarantee program called Magma, I guess, yeah, care deeply about the participants' actual quality of life. By looking at the survey data, what positive change did the participants experience regarding their income and their routine, social life, and self-esteem?
Yeah. So ALMP, that's short for active labor market policies, right? So that's this idea that a lot of like unemployment insurance providers, I guess, especially across Europe, North America, and so on, have all these programs that are intended to get people to find a job through training, through like job coaching, and so on. But and that they also include some examples of like short-term employment programs. Um, but like all the what we're arguing there is like all that literature and also the policies have mostly focused on getting people into regular like market jobs. Um, but that's not a particularly sensible goal for the people in our study population. So those are people who have problems for all kinds of reasons, right? It's for very diverse reasons, whether it's disabilities, whether it's the personal history, whether it's like other people they need to take care of, and so on. And so it's quite unlikely that they would find a regular job. And so what the goal of the policymaker was and what we're looking at in the study is not whether the program get transitions them from like a guaranteed job into like a private sector job, but instead whether just they are doing better in all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
dimensions. And so there we are looking at a whole range of indicators that sociologists have also focused on, which are things like what's your time structure, what's your sense of purpose, your inclusion in the community, your social connections, your the prevalence of depression, things like that. And so we find a lot of positive impacts of employment on these dimensions that go beyond the impact of just the cash, right? So getting a guaranteed job is more than just getting the income from the job,
Mm-hmm.
because people have a sense of doing something meaningful in their community and for others that they really benefit from.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And my last question for this research paper is related to fiscal architecture and cost-benefit dynamics. So the study documents a pronounced temporal pattern regarding the fiscal impact of the program. Why was the program very expensive for the government to run at the very beginning, but end up saving a massive amount of public money by the time the year 3.5 years were up? What scientific financial changes caused it to become so much cheaper over time?
Yeah, so we spend a fair amount of time kind of looking at the net costs for government of the program, right? Since it's something that policymakers obviously care a lot about. And so um, that gets a little complicated. One reason it gets complicated is because people get the income from the program, but then they
Mm-hmm.
get less benefits from other sources. And then they also pay taxes and they pay into social insurance as a consequence. And so you have to put all these different things together. And when you do that, that's when you start seeing these patterns, right? Where they get off unemployment insurance. So that's a big saving for the government, but then they get the wage in the guaranteed job. So the difference between that is already not that large. But then in the beginning, there's these training programs and the customization of the jobs for participants and so on. So that costs some money. Um, and so that falls away over time. And then actually a subset of people do end up transitioning to the private sector jobs, which where it gets even cheaper for the government.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so because of these dynamics over time, where people have less health problems, they find some of them find some other jobs, you save all these other government expenses, and you have these indirect benefits of tax payments and social insurance payments. If you take all of these things together, you see this pattern where it's a bit more costly than keeping people in unemployment insurance at the beginning, but then over time it really pays off. And on net, the program costs the government very little relative to the standard insurance, but has a lot of benefits for the participants. So, which is why we think this is actually turned out to be a great program that we should see on a larger scale in more places.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Professor. Those were my all questions for you. Uh, thank you for being our guest of today. I'm really happy for that. So my last request is like if you have any recommendation or any criticism toward our podcast, I mean you may get like we are open to the criticism. So yeah.
Yeah, of course, I will think about it and might write you an email if something comes up.
Uh-huh. All right. All right. So
Great.
thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thanks for having me,
Bye.
and good luck with the project.
All right. Thank you. Thank you
Bye
too.
bye.